Welcome if you are new here, and welcome back if you have been here before. This is one of the presentations that I have accidentally found in my archives of conferences. One of the conferences that was held back in 2020, just few weeks before lockdowns. It was in person and it wasn't recorded, so I thought it's very helpful to present it here, and it's about design thinking. Briefly, a selection of that workshop. Design to refine, part of design thinking. So we started first with the warm-up activity and building background, and then the program design process phases. And there was a study of the attendees' cases that was very interesting at that time, and the logic model as part 3. So we started with a warm-up, the below zero white experiment, and that was very interesting. We had also a handout with some items in the room. And the first activity was a warm-up. To the attendees, you are looking around you, suddenly you feel, suddenly you see, and suddenly you realize what's next. So here, there is a goal now. There is an objective, there is a mission. The person knows where he's heading. Whether you are a professional in your workplace, or even a person in your personal life, you know now at this moment that this is my objective and this is where I am directing my efforts. So in this case here, we are thinking of, in the case of the warm-up activity, we were thinking of building a shelter. But this type of shelter is different from the shelters that we know. So here, activity number 2 was, what are the governing factors or conditions? And in this workshop, the experiment was how to build an igloo. So there was this just short sentence to fill. How can we build an igloo when we have nothing but, or out of what? So what's next? So again, there is this factor of thinking about conditions. When we are designing, we are first thinking of the governing factors or conditions. And we have already noticed or knew or detected a problem. So we are trying to find a solution to a problem. In this case, we want to build an igloo, or in this case, this person wanted to build an igloo. So all he had was just this snow that is all around. So what is the first thing the person can do to start solving the problem? And obviously, there should be materials or resources that are needed. And here is the question mark, the big question mark. How can it be solved? There is the snow and there is the knife. How can we build an igloo? So in this case, here we are designing even more. How can the right solution be reached? And this is a very short video because this illustrates it in the most beautiful way from the BBC channel. And I will include the link below for you to check the original video. And if you had the chance to really follow up with the keywords, so to them, it's a matter of life and death here, because this is mainly about their survival. And I chose this video in particular because it's important to understand that design thinking is not the child of today, actually. It has always been on Earth from the very beginning of humanity because of survival reasons. And the second reason why I chose this video is that there are governing conditions that are very thoroughly explained, as you have seen. Plus, it involves children and how children are brought into the process, facilitated by an adult. And this is what we can do in classes in the most beautiful way. So there are obviously people are involved. In this case, there's an adult and there's a child, and they are both thinking together. There are materials used. At one point we saw they were using a saw, and at another point a small knife. And the main ingredient, if we may say so here, is the snow itself, but not any snow. There should be a very meticulous choice of the snow that was explained in the video. There are also action steps taken here. So you've seen how it is one of the very most complex type of structures. And that was another reason why I like this video, because if we ask the children of today, of the 21st century, 2024, can you build an igloo in the same way? It will be difficult to put all this together because it needed a special way of spiraling and building that thing up. Another factor is the time needed here. So there is this, for them, it was crucial. They have to build it on the same day. So there was a time factor involved here, especially in those harsh conditions. Here, one point can be the difference between life and death, as it was explained in the video. So here, inside the mind of this first Inuit on Earth, design thinking started, and it is so important. There were no technologies at that time. There were no books. Still, the mind, it's the brain and the mind coming together, bringing all this process until they reached a very effective result. So if we can just look into how this all process started. First, there was no shelter. So they had to think, we have to find a shelter. And not any shelter, a specific type of shelter, because in those harsh conditions, the sunlight should be able to come in and the wind should be kept out. So they looked around for material, and the only thing available is obviously snow. So they thought again and again how to cut the snow, because that is a very difficult, the very difficult thing to do. The snow is obviously very, very thick. So they got a knife or a saw, and in this video they used both. So they started cutting the snow, but then something happened. The snow cubes or rectangles they cracked. So that was an error here. And this drove them to think. Now they are thinking at a bigger picture. Snow must be hard and dry. It must be compressed. Again, here they needed an idea, a brilliant idea, how to test the snow. So they used here a probe. And that was another tool that they used to make the process successful. And then they built a shelter. The shelter did not get intact because snow fell off. So again, they had to think at the bigger picture. And then they found a special way of building the shelter. And that was the most brilliant idea. And this is all a summary of a design process in its simplest manner. So the key feature here of the structure is the spiral form that results from the use of wedge-shaped blocks. They're not any kind of blocks. They have to be cut in a certain way. And from that point, a continuous upward spiral produces a self-supporting dome. So this is a pure architecture. This is part of engineering. So here there had to be some conditions here. They had to do some kind of excavation. They had to take out those blocks shaved off in a sloping angle, and then they had to build it in a dome-shaped structure. The Inuits building from the inside, they're not standing outside, and that is a very important part to consider. And the last point, lighting a candle or a lamp causes top part to slightly melt. This then refreezes, strengthening the igloo. So this is another very nice strategy that they have used. So all this happened inside the mind of this Inuit. This is a person who have never seen books or used technology. So design is mainly the child of our own mind and how we bring all these things together through trial and error until we reach the desired result. So this is very interesting in my point of view, and this is what should be done more in classes and more in leadership. There was here a goal, there was an objective, or there was a mission, and we can say that their mission was accomplished very successfully. So here we come to design process, and in that workshop I talked about the whether it's on the school scale or on the class scale. So school program or system design process for leaders, there is a mission and a vision, but there are concerns that are coming opposite to that vision and mission, making it difficult or having those challenging steps that must be conquered. Otherwise, the mission and vision will not be well fulfilled. Or at the class level, when we discuss subjects, for example, design process for teachers, there are subject objectives. The teacher needs to meet the vision and mission, but there are also concerns. And those concerns are always there to oppose the process of development, of moving forward. And that's why here we have to stop and we have to think of solutions. So here, just like we have seen in the igloo experiment, there are people involved, materials used, action steps taken, and time is needed to get all these done. The process here is twofold. It's never about the student and the teacher, or I prefer to say learner instead of student and the teacher. It's also about leaders. So they're working together. So the subject program design process for learners, for example, if we take this separately, so there is the subject matter that is active learning, and there is the problem solving here, which is a non-traditional way of learning, and they are coming together and they're complementing each other without having this sturdy wall of barriers. These barriers are broken down because we have a proper design process. Again, people are involved here, students or learners and teachers. Materials are used, action steps are taken, and time is given so that the process ends successfully. So design thinking in schools, if you want to think about it, we have here two purposes. We are solving certain problems when it comes to leadership, because obviously there are problems in leadership, and it also requires some way of design thinking. And it has another purpose, which is in the classes during experiential learning, when learners are there to experiment, to go through trial and error, try to find solutions. And this makes learning so much more interesting than the regular traditional way that most of the schools still follow. So what are the phases here? The phase one, acknowledging the mission and the vision. We have to reflect. And here the context of the system here is the leader in case of leadership, and in case of a teacher handling design thinking inside the classroom. There is a concern here, and sometimes the concern may be long noticed and not reacted upon. So there is no solution yet, or at least it's still difficult to decipher all those small, tiny parts. So that's why it takes more time. The concern may simply not exist, but the enrichment is desired. So probably there is no problem in the school or the system or the class, but there is a desire for enrichment and advancement. Phase two, for example, here we have to consider the governing factors. So in its simplest way, it's mainly observations, because it's through observations that we can see what is all around and then go through with the process, move forward. So it starts with the observations and those quick, direct and indirect questioning. We can also do self-assessments to study the controlling factors or conditions. And here, obviously, they are on both levels, human and material. And the third way to better understand governing factors is the data collection and analysis, because here we have to progress or work based on research, not just speculations. We need some data on our desktops, within our hands, on those round tables, so we can study them together and come out with better conclusions. And then we need to consider the constraints, and this is very important. Sometimes schools neglect constraints, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and this unfortunately escalates and creates more problems. So the constraints are those fixed negatives. We have to really think, what are those negatives that we are facing day and day, and still we are not trying to resolve them. At the same time, we have to consider the freedoms, or those are the flexible positives. Are we really considering our positives, and are we considering them to be flexible? And this is very important during design thinking. So how do we study our governing factors? The point number one, or step number one, is to step out. You're always keeping the needs within focus. We are always keeping the research or data collected within focus. We are always keeping the stakeholder within focus. And here we mean the perspectives and the overall benefit. And we're always keeping in mind that some aspects might not be clear to all those involved. And this funnels to the lack of communication, one of the most prevalent barriers for success in schools, which is lack of communication. You're stepping out and keeping all these in mind. And then phase three, you are sketching the path. And I always quote what Einstein says: we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. That's why most of the time, we keep going in loops, and we are not reaching the desired outcome. For sketching the path, what do? We need to have those collaborative ideation sessions, simply brainstorming ideas. And this is very important because once you sit with learners, teachers, or as leaders, we are bringing out ideas without judging what type of ideas. You are trying to stir up this observation archives that you have in mind. You're putting all those data and ideas onto the discussion, and you're keeping your path open for more. And this is when imagination comes, and imagination is top priority, because without imagination, we cannot think of new variations. And point number 3, visual thinking, trying to sketch or draw our ideas, and we're connecting them. And I usually do this through systems thinking, and it's very, very helpful. And personal experiences and or expertise, obviously, because we always need feedback loops. And we're always being open for new suggestions throughout the planning process. And when we say new suggestions, we mean that we have to think of new solutions, of new ideas. Unfortunately, sometimes schools or leaders or even teachers, they stick to the ways that they have already been using for years. And this stifles all the possibilities for discovering something new. And the one additional point, never criticize or judge the given suggestions. And this is very important. And here comes biases, but that's a different topic to discuss later. And keep track of time. Obviously, while you're doing design thinking, you don't want to just dwell on the same idea and keep revolving within the same domain. You just want to watch out how you are taking the process further, because eventually you want to reach the final stages. You're stepping out again. You are always keeping the suggestions or solutions or possibilities within range. Like we said before, we're keeping the research data collected within our focus, the stakeholders, and collaboration. Keep in mind that it's necessary. While we are within this process of bringing out those ideas, studying all this data, we are always stepping out, watching. It's just like watching out what we're doing. And this is part of metacognitive learning and discovery. So this is very important. And phase 4, first draft of the design process. Now we have come out with some solutions. We want to start prototyping or designing it, putting it into process, whether it's a plan or it's a design that we will be using with our learners in classes. It depends on what you need. It comes after imagining a wide variety of suggestions, obviously after discussions, after hands-on tangible outcomes. You have hard copies, you have soft copies. The design process or the prototyping can be simple, sometimes can be advanced. There is an easier reaction and interaction among everybody who's involved. We are keeping it exciting, because that's the beauty of the design process. It is exciting. You are always in this flow of discovery. You are experimenting and discovering. And we have the courage to decide throughout the stage whether you carry on with the prototype or not, whether we adopt. This is the AOD, adopt or discard. And this is critical, because sometimes you reach a certain prototype when you think, well, I don't think it's going to help us. So in this case, it is useless to carry on. So that is when you have to stop. But there is a stage then that you have to stop and say, okay, we will adopt this or discard. And when you adopt, obviously you'll continue. When you discard, when you decide to discard, means you have to start the process all over again, because you still didn't find a solution. Again, we're stepping out. Again, we're keeping all the suggestions to solutions, possibilities within range, the research and the data, the stakeholders, and the skills learned. But here, after doing the prototype, you have learned so many skills. And the skills learned here are the target, not just the end product. So here it's very nice and helpful, actually, to take some time to celebrate what you have reached so far, because it's the process. And I always say it's the process, not just the end product. And phase 5 here, we are testing the prototype. Now we think that it's worth adopting, so we are putting it into testing phase. We want to evaluate. And here you are putting this 3D into action, no matter what it is. Like I said, if it's a matter of leadership, case, then you are probably working on a plan. So you want to put this into execution and to see this is its 3D form. So we're putting this 3D into action to test it. It has to be on ground, in the hands of those involved. And we're studying here the reaction and interaction to test it. And we're keeping in mind vision and mission is always on our mind, the values, the safety, different types of learners, equity, equality, etc. And here we get intertwined with the prototype stage, because here, if it's not working, create another prototype or refine the same prototype. So it's like you're always testing and asking yourself, do I move further or not? You're asking for feedback in this phase 5. Every step on the way, you are avoiding words that might have negative connotations, such as those that underestimate a member's work or effort. And this happens so much in classrooms when learners are working on a certain project. So it's very important to avoid negative phrases, negative words, or negative connotations, and never lose hope if you think that it will not work. That's part of the learning process. And always keep room for documenting. This is very important. There are always those logs that we keep, and we're writing on them whatever we are reaching, those main points, so that later on we can come back to those files and check when we move to another project. Whether it's a school program or subject design process, leaders, teachers, and learners, we have seen that there is a vision and mission always there for everyone to consider. There are the subject objectives, meeting the vision and mission, or aligning with the vision and mission, and you have the subject objectives. It's so much fun because this can be applied to any situation. Sometimes a pilot program is needed, and that's obviously not an issue. It can be prepared. It must activate imagination. Design thinking is based on imagination. We're always creating a model, whether it's a product or an experience. Needs are always within the focus, because at the end, you're designing to meet certain needs. And it's better be divided into reflective intervals. Like we said, there are basic and advanced prototypes, so it depends accordingly. You should consider also the stakeholders' engagement, time, and cost, keeping it in mind. It does not have to be perfect, and this is so important to explain, especially when it involves children. So we are learning from the process. Mistakes are part of the design process. And most important lessons here too, we have to conquer challenges. We're fostering ownership here, because once you face an error and you fix it, then you can say that I have fixed this error. It means now I own the solution. I own the step. It's very important. This is the basic element of engagement. Those people involved, whether they are the teachers or the learners or the leaders, here they are able to make decisions. And obviously, the last thing is celebrating success, sharing whatever was done, because this is very, very fundamental in highlighting the strengths and the skills that were put into that project or program. We can think about it as a logic model, actually, and this is one of the nice samples that I shared. Like, you have resources and input, so you need resources and input to operate if you're working on a program level. If you have access to them, then here you can use them to accomplish your planned activities. You move on to activities, and then if you have your activities, if you could accomplish your activities, you are delivering the amount of product or services that you intended, or the outputs. And once you reach the outputs here, you can think of outcomes, because now your participants will benefit. These are the outcomes. And from these outcomes, there is this impact. And here we will see fundamental changes on ground, hands-on. They are felt, they are seen, they are giving this different way of experiencing the situation, whether it's through learning or just through leading. Planned work is steps number 1 and 2. You're bringing the resource inputs, you're doing the activities, and the third or fourth or fifth element, they are the intended results. So this is a very logic model, because it makes sense to everybody involved, whether it is on a student level or on a leadership level. Example of a tutoring case a school that was considering tutoring. And there is this series of it and then relationships. So if we do this, then. So this is a very simple and yet very effective process. If we invest time and money, then we can provide tutoring 3 hours a week. If we provide tutoring 3 hours a week for school, then students struggling can be tutored. If we do this, then they will learn and improve their skills. And if they do this, they will get better results. And if they do this, then they will move to another level, whatever. So this was included in one of the universities as a study, and that was very helpful. The way you put your steps together from an action to an outcome is very, very significant. Let us all design to refine. This is a very exciting process in which learners can be involved, teachers are involved, and obviously leaders are involved. Thank you for being here.